So folks, behind me you see the outcropping of rock in the general area which many believe is Golgotha or Golgotha, where Christ was crucified. There are three main reasons why some began to identify the sites as Golgotha back in the 1840s. The first immediate reason is the resemblance to the shape of a skull some saw in the side of the hill. Something that looks like eye sockets, a jawline in the mouth, maybe even a decaying nose. The word Golgotha, or Golgotha, is an Aramaic word which literally simply means skull. The English word Calvary comes from the Latin calvaria, and again, literally it just means skull. According to the scriptures, Christ was crucified at a place named Golgotha, and because of the resemblance to a shape of a skull on the side of this hill, some Christians in the 19th century said, maybe this was the spot. The second main reason why they pointed to this place is because we also happen to be in a very central location. We're very close to the old city of Jerusalem, just 200 yards away from a major city gate called Damascus Gate. In those days, it was a very important road which came out of Damascus Gate, passed very close to here, and then continued to the north, eventually to the city of Damascus in Syria. So because we're located so close to the city and so close to what used to be a major highway, this would have been a logical place for a crucifixion. The Romans always crucified in places which were accessible to the populace, usually right on the sides of the major roads, because one of the purposes of the crucifixions was to instill fear in the hearts of the people passing by. And a third reason why some began to point to this place as Golgotha is a local Jewish tradition, according to which this area was used as a place of execution even prior to the Roman occupation of the land. So according to a local tradition, this is where they used to bring convicted criminals in order to be stoned. If this tradition is correct, then it's definitely possible that also the Romans, after the Roman occupation, continued to use the same place as an official site of execution. But like I implied before, no one can dogmatically claim that this is the spot where Christ was crucified. So one thing I always love to do with the pilgrims that come here is trying to imagine where the cross might have been. And you know, very often I see people's eyes gazing upwards to the top of the hill. After all, most of us grew up with that image of three crosses on top of a beautiful, distant, grassy hill. But it's very unlikely that Jesus was crucified in that manner. Notice that in the scriptures, it never once specifically mentions a hill when speaking of the place where Christ was crucified. It only says that Jesus was brought to the place of a skull, or to the place named Golgotha. Actually, according to Roman historians, the normal mode of crucifixion was to crucify right on the sides of the roads. And also in the scriptures, we read that people were passing by the cross of Jesus. They were able to speak to Christ, to hear what he was saying, to read the sign above the cross, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. So if this is Golgotha, the cross was probably to the bottom of the hill, among the people. Pretty much where you find this bus terminal today. And sure, some people find it grossly inappropriate that we have a bus station here. But honestly, I think it's perfect. Because it's that perfect reminder to us that Jesus was not crucified in some beautiful or reverent place, but rather in a place full of noise, full of filth, definitely full of people. You know, usually when I take groups around the garden, they take photographs at this point. And sometimes I tell them that everybody wants to take a picture of the skull shape in the side of the hill. But you guys know that you can find thousands of those on the internet by now. From time to time, you get that person just kind of turns around and takes a shot of the bus station. That's the guy that really got it. In the Gospel according to John, after John describes the crucifixion of Christ, he writes that in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden there was a new tomb in which no one had been laid before. Of course, that was the tomb in which Christ was buried. Some of the other Gospels describe the tomb as being cut into the rock. Matthew says that it was owned by Joseph of Arimathea, that same secret disciple who received special permission from Pontius Pilate to take the body of Jesus off of the cross. Behind me is the tomb, which many believe is the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, where Jesus was buried. It is a rich man's tomb cut into the solid rock. It is very close to the place where many believe that Christ was crucified, which would fit John's description. And it is in a garden. Now, naturally the garden that I'm standing in is a modern garden. But there are indications that this place was functioning as a garden also in the days of Jesus. For example, quite a large wine press dating back to the Roman period was discovered here in the garden. A clear indication that in the days of Jesus, this place would have been a vineyard, in other words, an agricultural garden. When John mentions a garden, he's almost definitely referring to an agricultural garden, not an ornamental garden, a garden just for beauty's sake, like this garden is right now. Think about that other garden which John mentions in his Gospel, the garden that Luke calls Gethsemane. You can see some of that garden, what's left of it, in Jerusalem today, and it was an olive grove. The word Gethsemane, actually means oil press. Just as the garden where Jesus was arrested was an agricultural garden, so too the garden in which he was buried was probably an agricultural garden. Maybe the vineyard that was here at the time. The tomb behind me was rediscovered in the modern period in 1867. Almost since that point, many Christians began to believe that perhaps it is the tomb of the resurrection. You know what? I would never dogmatically say this is the place. I would never even tell you that this is probably the tomb of the resurrection. But it is, without a doubt, a perfect place for Christians to come together in order to remember and celebrate the resurrection of Christ together. That's what this place is really all about. The tomb is divided into two small rooms. The room I'm standing in right now is called the Antechamber. This is a room where they would prepare the body for burial, where they would gather around the body in order to cry and mourn over the body. In essence, this is where the funeral service took place. To my left is the burial chamber, the site where the body was actually buried. If this really is the tomb where Christ was buried, it's usually believed that his body was placed here at the far end. The main reason why is because this particular burial niche is visible also from the outside. And in some of the Gospels, namely Luke and John, it's indicated that it was possible on Sunday morning to see that the tomb of Jesus was empty, even from the outside without entering into the tomb. For example, in the Gospel according to John, we read that the first disciple to come back to the tomb of Jesus on Sunday was John himself. Peter was just behind him. But before John went inside, scriptures say that he stooped down, looked in, and saw the burial cloths lying empty. Again, for that to have been possible in this particular tomb, it seems likely that the body was placed here at the far end. The entrance to the tomb must have been shut with a large rolling stone. Now, an original rolling stone was never discovered here, but that's not very surprising, because this area was quite dramatically changed in later centuries by the Byzantine Christians and later also by the Crusaders. Among other things, the stone was taken away. What you do find here is a channel that runs right in front of the entrance to the tomb. The original function of that channel was probably to be a rolling stone track. In the Gospels, we read that on Sunday morning, first light after the Sabbath, the women were returning to the tomb of Jesus in order to anoint his body with oils and spices. On the way back, they were asking, "Who will roll aside the stone for us?" Yet when they arrived, they found that the stone had already been rolled aside. And in the Gospel according to Mark, it says that when the women entered into the tomb, they saw an angel. What the angel told them is, "Do not be afraid. You come seeking for Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified. But he is not here, for he is risen." Ultimately, that's the message of this place. Those are the words you see on the door as you walk inside. He is not here, for he is risen. People come to this site from all over the world. They come with different expectations and with different motivations. And my fear is that a lot of them come into this tomb and just take a lot of photographs. But I always like to challenge the groups to check the tourists at the door, to turn their cameras off, to come inside into this tomb, and for once, just listen. Really listen. Listen to the words that in some sense are still echoing in here. He is not here, for he is risen.